If you're a regular listener to Labrador Morning, you may recall Wayne Button's book review of I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. Now, that book inspired his review of today's novel, and here to find out what he's reviewing is Wayne Button. Good morning.
Good morning, Janice. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. Yourself?
Oh, I'm great. It's Friday, beautiful day, and I get to review another book with you guys.
There you go. What more could you ask for?
That's right.
So what book are you telling us about today, Wayne?
Today I'm going to go with Chase Darkness with Billy Jensen. As you mentioned, it was a book that I found out about from I'll Be Gone in the Dark because Billy Jensen, along with another guy, actually finished that book at the end. Unfortunately, Michelle McNamara passed away while she was writing it. So he was good friends with her, and he ended up finishing it. And that's kind of how I found out about his book called Chase Darkness with me. But basically, Billy was a reporter for true crime in L.A. for about 15 years. And he would only do cold cases. So he would only do cases where, it wasn't solved. And that kind of really frustrated him. He really wanted to do cases where he found out who the killer was. And serendipitously, he was one night just on his phone watching social media like we all do. And he ended up seeing a video about a man that was assaulted and ended up eventually getting murdered as well. A man by the name of Marcus Gaines in Chicago. And he was just fed up and said, I wonder if I can find out who the murderer is. So what he did was he actually started doing geo-targeting where he did Facebook and Twitter ads specifically to the 3-block radius where this man was murdered to see if anybody could find out who the murderer was. And then eventually he got a DM on his Twitter from somebody saying, hey, are you looking for this guy? And it was a really, really up-close picture of the murderer. And he said, yeah, that's who it is. And then he went through Chicago mugshots that you can get to the public and found the name of the person and handed it into the cops. And eventually even tracked them down to Maine and handed it into the Maine people, the Maine police. And they ended up catching the guy. So he actually had an integral part in catching the murderer for Marcus Gaines. And then he decided that this is what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. And he's been doing it ever since.
So we have a clip of you reading an excerpt from the book. Have a listen to this.
After the story was published, I began receiving letters from people asking if I could help investigate the unsolved murder of their daughter, their sister, their son. A wave of sorrow and anger and a small, minuscule bit of hope washed over me. For 5 years, I've been reaching out to people to tell their stories, trying to convince them that the story would be in careful hands. Now people were coming to me, people who had lost the thing that they held most dear. It was overwhelming, but I knew this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
And that was a clip from the book Chase Darkness with Me by Billy Jensen. So Wayne, what made you decide to read this book?
It sounded like a really interesting story, and I heard about him through Michelle McNamara's book, and what happened was actually I originally heard it on CBC. I was actually headed back to work, and I heard him doing an interview with you guys on one of your shows, and I couldn't get out of the car. I actually had to stop and listen to what he had to say, and I wanted to wait until I found out the name of his book before I could even get it in my vehicle to go to work. So it was just a very intriguing story, and he's been doing it ever since, and he's actually got up to about 10 murders now solved, believe it or not, what he does. It was just a really interesting story overall.
So Wayne, who would you recommend this book to?
I recommend this to anybody who really likes true crime, anybody that's into an investigation type thing. It's something extremely interesting to find out how, you yourself, a regular person, can do research and eventually, go ahead and maybe help solve a murder. So anybody that's really into true crime, I gotta say, would probably like it.
Well, it sounds really interesting, and really appreciate you telling us more about it this morning, and can't wait to find out what you're going to be reviewing for us next week.
Well, next week I won't reveal it, but I am going to be doing something because, next week is Pride Week here in Labrador City, so I kind of want to do a book that touches on that subject a little bit.
Very fitting. Well, we look forward to hearing more about that. Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks, Janice. Have a good week.
You as well. And that's Wayne Button, our book lover from Labrador City.
After this, funny feeling we did.
We were watching TV. Watching TV. We were watching TV. Watching TV.
Well, Wayne Walsh is our TV nut, and this week he's reviewing Won't You Be My Neighbor? The movie feature on Prime tells the story of the famous story of Mr. Rogers and his neighborhood, but with a twist. Have a listen.
Hey, I'm looking for Fred Rogers. In here.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Will you be mine? Could you be mine? Please won't you be my neighbor? Hello, neighbor.
Mr. Rogers, I'm here to interview you.
It is so nice to meet you.
You okay?
Profiling Mr. Rogers.
Wait, please don't ruin my childhood.
And that, of course, was a clip from Won't You Be My Neighbor? And good morning, Wayne. How are you?
Good morning. Great, you?
Well, I tell you, a little bit of that clip brought me right back to my childhood, remembering my days of watching Mr. Rogers and learning about his neighborhood.
Yeah, the music brings you back to another time, don't you notice?
It certainly does. Can you set the record straight? This is not a children's movie. It's not even a family-friendly one, is it?
No, not per se. I would say it's for a mature audience. Won't You Be My Neighbor is a documentary about it. The one that you should watch is A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I watched both of them, so I like to say that the A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is the Tom Hanks one, in which he does an amazing job playing Fred Rogers.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I haven't seen either one of them, but I've been interested. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah, I was expecting a kind of a puff piece about Mr. Rogers, but this movie is actually taken from the account of a magazine writer, interviewer who gets signed to do a little puff piece on Mr. Rogers, but once he gets there, Mr. Rogers is the type of person that he sees through you and sees your emotions, and it shows more from the interviewer's perspective and how he deals with his family and how Mr. Rogers affects that. You get to see a lot about how Mr. Rogers' character is, what he does, how he's been able to do what he's been doing for so long, the way he's treated on crews, the respect he has for children and people. You really get the idea of who Mr. Rogers was, but this movie has to do more about the interviewer and his family and the troubles they're going through.
So, Wayne, were you surprised at first when you started watching it?
I very much was. When I watched it, they kind of made Mr. Rogers look like a different kind of person completely. But as you get into it, and anyone who knows the children's show from us growing up that was on forever, know that this was actually one of the very rare people in the world that's just good to their being.
Now, critics were very good when this movie came out, and I guess a lot of people, as you said, liked Mr. Rogers. How would you rate the movie overall?
I would probably give it about a 6 to 7 on this one. It requires you to follow along a lot. It's nice to see the character of Mr. Rogers, but this movie is focused around the man and his family and his relationship with Mr. Rogers more than being completely a Mr. Rogers movie.
Who would you recommend this movie to?
I would recommend this to anyone who grew up with Mr. Rogers, He's a PBS character. I don't know if even kids these days know who he is, but he was a fundamental character in the growing up of many kids between, I guess, the 70s on up through the 90s for my childhood. So.
Now, Wayne, we have time for a second pick this morning, and I'm told that you're addicted to this YouTube show. Here's how it sounds.
To 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown, a show about letters, numbers, and conundrums.
That's 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown. What a title. I have never heard of this before, Wayne. What's it all about?
Yeah, I kind of find sometimes when I'm doing this reviewing, I try to find something that's so rare that is like the diamond in the rough. And as embarrassing as it is, I can't get enough of this show. The show is called 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown. You can find it on YouTube, a lot of episodes. It's big in Europe. But what it is the UK and has kind of a way of being funny that they have a show called Countdown, which I recommend nobody watch unless you're, if Jeopardy's too wild for you, you go to Countdown. But this is just a show where they actually spoof a real show. So the real show is doing synonyms with words or letters and math equations and this, and it's one person versus one person and an old man host. This is somehow what they did was they tried to make this show funny. So they hired two comedians to be team captains. Jimmy Carr, who some people can and can't take, as a host. But the other thing that's different is the girl that does the math equations, Rachel Riley, and the one that does the words, Susie Dent, are on both of these shows. So they did a serious one, and then they did this one, which is just a complete joke.
How did you come about finding this show?
I have no idea, but it's when you see the link come up and the music start, like we just heard, it doesn't sound very funny, but it's probably the only show I've ever seen that is actually funnier than Steve Harvey's Family Feud. And I guess a lot of that reason is that it's an unedited, uncensored game show, and it's making fun of the real one. So they play for kind of fake prizes. They have team members that have other comedians come on every show, and they keep bringing a different perspective to it. And at the same time, I've made my wife do this, but she can actually sit down and we can play the games on the screen. So when they go to pick their letters, they pick 9 letters, and they got to make a word out of it in 30 seconds. So you can do that with the show and see if you can get a word longer than theirs. For the math equations, they'll take 6 numbers, and they'll give you a random number on the screen, and you got to somehow get that answer with the numbers that were picked. So it is the kind of game that you can play along with, and in between that, I just can't stop laughing because you never know what's going to happen. The other thing that happens is when they're trying to do the equations or the host and whatever he can find are trying to distract the people from doing the equation, and sometimes it's just out of this world, you don't expect it.
Well, you may just have introduced Labrador to a whole new game opportunity. Thanks so much for this.
Oh, you're welcome.
And that, of course, is Wayne Walsh, our TV watcher. And before that, Wayne Button, our book buddy.